Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer, and I hope everybody out there is doing very well today. We are playing more Golgari Midrange, everybody's favorite deck in Modern for you, and we're doing it today in replay format, which we have not done in a while. So I know there's a lot of people out there who will enjoy that, and that's what we're doing. And so this league that you're about to see was only the second league I've played since all of the changes happened, since Horizons Tech came out, since they combined competitive and friendly into one league. So for those reasons, things are kind of all over the place. But the one thing that everybody was talking about at the time that I decided to jump into this league was the Hogaak, who knows, Bridgevine deck, the new Bridgevine deck with Altar of Dementia and Carrion Feeder and so forth. Therefore, as much as those who have been with me for a while know that I like to play very much the same or similar list, get a lot of reps in, didn't feel able to do so with that Bridgevine deck seemingly the by far most played deck of the meta, plus all of the other incentives to do so. I ended up saying we've got no choice but to run a couple of main deck Nile Spellbombs. So this list structurally and conceptually is pretty similar to the one we played in the last league that you may have seen on this channel, but the biggest change is 2 copies of Nile Spellbomb. Another very significant change is we are only playing 23 land. Now, a lot of people have said for a while, can we cut down to 23 land? I think Nurturing Peatland, if anything, makes it less appealing to cut down to 23 lands, because of course, you want to curve out, you want to hit your land drops, and Peatland allows you to have flood insurance. So, if anything, Peatland decreases our incentives to cut lands, so why have I cut them? Well, here's the other side of the equation. We now have 4 1-mana spells in the main deck which cycle, for lack of a better way to phrase it, and they are certainly consistency tools in terms of hitting our third land and curving out, and or at least they can be, right? And in general, the curve has been lowered. We have removed a tireless tracker from the previous list. Kalidas is no longer in the main deck, so this is a very lean, mean, grave-hating machine, basically. And therefore, I think if there is a shell that makes sense to lower the land count just by 1, it is a shell much like this, again, with a lot of 1-mana spells, many of which are cantrips, or can be cantrips if we need them to be. So the land that I cut was Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, which is a land I still like, especially in a deck list like this that plays a couple of Decays and a Flayer. Lots of incentives to make green and black early on, along with our ever-present incentive to have double black by turn 3 and single black by turn 1. I think Urborg is still a great way to achieve all of that, while also making some of our other lands better along the way. However, if I had to make one cut, I guess it was going to be the Urborg for this list, so that's what we did. Could also have gone down to, 3 basic swamps, which is the other option, but I changed up enough other things that I wanted to just play a really stock mana base. And another thing that I changed for this list is I finally tried, after being months and months one of the most staunch advocates of the 3-3 split of Inquisition versus Thoughtseize, I just decided to give the 4-2 split a shot. Again, burn is very heavy in the meta, and we'll see, this is not necessarily a change that is facilitated or made better by the other things that we're doing here. It's just something I decided while we're at it, why not? Let's give 4-2 a shot, so we'll see how that plays out. In the sideboard, again, we're staying nice and lean. Relative to the previous league, we have brought back Engineered Explosives. We have also brought Duress into the fold. Again, just trying to keep the curve nice and low. But we had a few slots to play with, of course, because we've got the spell bombs in the main deck now. Again, we lost a tracker to make way. One of the Collective Brutalities got moved to the side. We're still playing 2 in the 75. So that is the league. That is the list, rather. We are about to run through a league. So the main change, of course, once again, is the Nile Spellbomb, and I'll just mention the new naming and thumbnail creating conventions for the leagues on this channel. My previous league, Unearth, was the background art featured on the thumbnail, and this month, or excuse me, this video, it is Nile Spellbomb. So that is just basically at a glance of the thumbnail, you can see the kind of feature card of the league, whether it be in the deck construction or the performance or both. Whatever card art you see depicted in the thumbnail is kind of the one that that the list is really set up to make great. Now, speaking of cards like Nile Spellbomb, I just want to touch on a few quick things before we get into our replay. Number one is this card, Gaia's Blessing. Now, I was going in blind. I'd never played against the new Bridgevine deck before, but I was still trying to make a list to beat it, while also not punting the rest of the field. And Gaia's Blessing is something that it's a card that's been on my radar for a long time now. It's probably still too cute, but I just want to put that out there in case anybody wants to test it or in case anyone has any thoughts. So this is a very reasonable graveyard interaction card, and it cantrips, and it is anti-mill technology. It actually hoses a mill win condition unless they have a way to get it out of the library or out of the graveyard. And, of course, the new look Bridgevine deck does have the mill win condition and is a significantly graveyard-based deck. So, if there was ever a time where this card might be playable, maybe it's now between the new Bridgevine and all the other graveyard decks in the format. I didn't end up quite including it because, again, I had so many other changes to make. I wasn't just going to totally upend the apple cart, but wanted to mention this card in case anyone wants to give it a shot or in case anyone has any thoughts. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to my buddies over the weekend. I don't do like any paper limited, almost ever, but some of my good friends and I got together, we opened some Modern Horizons product, and we had a really good time, and I just wanted to say shout out to PJ, to Nate, and to Chris. It was all kinds of fun, and to all you out there, Modern Horizons Limited really is pretty fun. We did a little sealed event where I built Esper Midrange Ninjas with this Fallen Shinobi as my star. Absolute bomb in Limited, no question about it, but it was a really coherent shell besides. And then we did a two-headed giant draft, and I ended up pack one, pick one with Kess Dissident Mage, which, felt a little questionable at the time, perhaps. But I ended up being able to draft a ton of spot removal. I aggressively drafted snow basics and had a snow sub-theme. It was actually a really strong deck when it all came together. So just wanted to share that with all of you, say a shout out to my boys, and I'm pretty happy with Modern Horizons. We'll see if it ruins Modern, but I don't think it will. I think the power level is appropriate, and hopefully this Bridgevine is not the new terror of the format, but in any case, Modern Horizons, it's a good time in Limited, it's a good time in Modern, and now, speaking of the latter, let's get into our league. Alright, my friends, round one, game one of this Modern League. Our opponent on the play will mulligan. Our hand is perfectly acceptable, it's very functional, it's got a lot of utility, and of course it's got double discard. The opponent goes Forest into Amulet of Vigor, having Scry to the top. So we're against Amulet Titan. We lead on Inquisition of Kozilek, and we see Talaria West, Vesuva, Amulet of Vigor, and Summoner's Pact. So this deck needs a lot of lands to operate, and it gets a lot of value out of hitting those land drops. It's kind of the maximum capacity as far as utility out of a land base goes, right? So we can not necessarily assume what they scryed at the top. It could very well just be another land. Or, if not a land, probably some kind of early game ramp or, card selection, Ancient Stirring, something like that. So, what do we take here? Well, some people who don't know how the deck works might kind of assume Amulet of Vigor in doubles is a little bit redundant. Quite the opposite. This actually enables some of their most absolute busted starts off of double early Amulet. So I went ahead and took away that Amulet. Also knowing that they're not going to Summoner's Pact next turn, and we can, of course, Thoughtseize next turn if we're so inclined. So, sure enough, they did have a land on top, a dual land, which is obviously really nice for the opponent. And we draw Fatal Push, which is a little bit medium in the matchup, but could be okay. So, of course, we're going to Thoughtseize, get that Summoner's Pact out of their hand, play our land tapped, and pass the turn. Opponent rips an Ancient Stirrings off the top, and they find Karn the Great Creator. So, Karn really is making it into many, if not most, decks that can, handle his the relatively high mana investment needed to make him good and viable. In other words, you'll go into a lot of ramp decks, right? I'm not going to delete the lands from our revealed cards section here just because a lot of them get bounced back to the hand anyway, right? So we'll just leave them all there for now. So of course I could have played Scavenging Ooze there, but I think it's more important, especially now that we know they have a Karn ready to cast, to take them off of this dual land. So we wait to the draw step in case they're playing a greedily low amount of basic forest and they drew one for turn. But unfortunately we didn't get them. This works out really nicely for us though. The opponent ripped an Azusa off the top. Nice card. But they move to the beginning of combat without making another land drop, and that is the perfect time to Fatal Push her. And also, of course, we have the Revolt that we needed because we fielded, so that all worked out fairly well. And we rip a Thoughtseize off the top, which is a really nice answer to that Karn. So, down goes Karn, and the opponent just has Tolaria West and Vesuva in hand, so we are disrupting extremely well. The big problem is we haven't started clocking yet. We kind of had to sequence in such a way where we haven't gotten our Skoos down, and indeed the Skoos is a bit of a medium clock, but we have every reason to believe that we're in a pretty good position at the moment. So, opponent's going to make a copy of Tolaria West, end step will eat Azusa. Untap, we draw Field of Ruin. Yeah, not the best, obviously a good card in the matchup and better than most lands would be here, but really we want some kind of way to take over the game with like a Liliana of the Veil, or we just want more creatures at this point. The opponent rips a Gruul Turf, which is actually a really good draw. And now this is a really interesting spot, right? So, triggered ability on the stack, when Gruul Turf enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. So, as far as I could tell, I was actually trying to play around this, and I don't believe I could unless I spent all of my resources to do so. So what I mean is they're going to bounce a Tolaria West back to hand, then use it to transmute to tutor up something for CMC 0, right? That's a big part of the deck's engine, this card Tolaria West and its tutor effect. So if the Gruul Turf triggered ability targeted a land, I could respond with that ability on the stack with my Field of Ruin. However, it's just return a land you control to its owner's hand. So the way I interpreted this trigger is that if I Field of Ruin 1, they can bounce this Vesuva back to hand, and then, maybe that's still fine, but ultimately not. I don't have a way to fully shut them off of the utility lands either way, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Unless I decided to Field 1 and Trophy the other, which I did actually think about. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I just decided to go ahead and let it resolve, hold up my Assassin's Trophy, and they get a Summoner's Pact, so Trophy is going to hopefully take care of whatever they play. And then that also allows me, instead of competing over the utility, to just set them back on a land. As far as I know, they don't have any other dual lands at this point, so I think obviously that was a really interesting spot. Like I said, you could maybe argue for a different line or two, but I think it's reasonable to just allow that to happen because we have Trophy in hand, and then to field the dual land. So, we'll see how it plays out. Unfortunately, we are still flooding, so we're just attacking with our 3/3, whose utility is very, very limited at this stage of the game against this deck. And the opponent rips a Gemstone Mine, so not a dual land, but they do have land number 6 in hand, and we just flood yet again. So, not much you can do about this flood in this particular situation. Opponent has a Sakura Tribe Scout. And sorry, I guess I'm mistaken, they don't have a 6th land in hand, so Sakura Tribe Scout, just kind of a 1/1 at this point, so we have every window to win this game, to just bury them, but we're flooding like crazy. A little ironic that the first game I think I've ever played, I think I've never played a league on Moto with only 23 lands. So the first game of the first league, we just flood with our lowered land count and our higher density than ever of cantrips. A little ironic, but what can you do? The opponent will pact for a Titan, and then they will cast the Titan having finally drawn land number 6, despite all of our disruption. We just haven't clocked them quickly enough, and now it is Primeval Titan time. So they go get Simic Growth Chamber, and I guess just another forest. And sometimes the replay really doesn't like this deck. Sometimes the replay really doesn't like Amulet Titan. So I guess, yeah, okay, it says the game ended. Didn't quite end here, but here's what happened, my friends. The opponent, we obviously have one answer to the Titan. The opponent rips another Titan. We just lose. Like, we kind of had them close on the ropes with the Skoos, despite how slow we were out of the gates. That's how long it took them to get going. You know, they didn't have a Titan hit the field until turn 9. So our disruption was good, but the opponent just ripped another Titan, and basically that was that. The flood is what did us in. We can disrupt all we want, but we need a clock, and we kind of sort of had one. If we had another companion to the Skoos, whether it be a creature or a piece of recursive value like Liliana, I think this game was definitely ours. But hey, you know, we are going to flood sometimes. So a bit of a tough way to go game 1. We had an awesome start. We had 3 early discard spells, Field of Ruin, Fatal Push at a great time, just flooded out. So anyway, that was game 1. Let's take a look at how we sideboarded against Amulet Titan. Alright, my friends, so against Amulet Titan, Fulminator Mage is among our best cards, pairs very well with Surgical Extraction, which is also good for extracting Titan itself, and that sometimes extracting a bounce land is reasonable. I think Titan is probably the primary surgical target, but either way, very reasonable card. So in the past, I've only brought in one, but with this configuration, I think I should be bringing in both, because you know, we have a lot of kind of bad cards in the main deck, and we're already bringing in some other stuff that's not that great. I brought in Kalitas. He's really, really not that impressive here, but honestly can help us win a grindy game, and we are trying to take it to the grind. We're going to try to take it long. It's kind of weird to think of a value piece like this as being effective against what's basically a combo deck, but remember that they pivot to almost like a big mid-range deck, like a ramp-style mid-range deck almost against us post-side to some degree. There's still the combo element. They still sometimes leave an amulet against us, right? But Kalitas is actually pretty reasonable. We also bring in Damnation. Damnation, we need as many things that answer Titan as we can, and often their board does get pretty wide when they bring in some value pieces post-side. Damnation is just one of our cleanest out, so these 7 come in. And I went on the full hedge plan here in terms of siding things out. So Nile Spellbomb is a pretty clear, just almost dead card, but Collective Brutality just doesn't do enough. It's clunkier discard. It doesn't have that many targets. I think Duress is mostly better, and Duress doesn't even come in. You know, it's just Collective Brutality is just not that impressive here. And Fatal Push, I ended up cutting 2 here. This is a card that you want to retain access to. You kill the early Tribe Scouts, you kill the Azusas, but, you know, even Tribe Scout's a card that might come out to some degree against us, and then they might have value pieces like, who knows, Tireless Tracker, Courser, you just have to see, right? But Fatal Push is a reasonable card to retain access to because it's so efficient, but it's just going to miss on so much of their crucial stuff that we do hedge away from it a bit. The same exact argument applies to Abrupt Decay, so again, I'm hedged. Leaving 1 in, leaving 2 in, trimming away. And then Skoos is just kind of our least efficient threat, so we'll trim a Skoos away and call it good. None of the other cards are really that interesting. You can get a little mileage out of things like Plague Engineer and Liliana the Last Hope if they're on a Sakura Tribe Scout dependent plan, but otherwise it's all pretty medium. I think most of what else is in our deck at this moment is much, much better. So that is how we sided against Amulet Titan. There's a lot of wiggle room here. It's a very nuanced decision. There's not really a clear, like, these cards are great, these cards are bad, outside of a couple examples. So feel free to take this as more art than science, but that's how we did it here. I think it's pretty reasonable, and we'll go to game 2. On the play here, my friends, and our hand is fine. It, we really wish we could just know that we're getting this third black land with a hand like this, but the opponent will mulligan, which makes our life easier, and the hand is great, Goyf is awesome. If we do ever hit the third land, we've got Field of Ruin activation as well, and of course we've got Fulminator plus Surgical. Unearth is a cycling tool, or to buy back Fulminator. Like, this hand is really, really powerful. We just need to hit the third land, and we really would like it to be an untapped black land if possible. So we draw Inquisition after the opponent goes Forest into Amulet of Vigor. And, Inquisition is tempting, no doubt, but having perhaps been a little bit scarred from my loss last game due to a lack of clock, I do decide to go with the Tarmogoyf here, and I think that is probably correct, although there is an argument for Inquisition. You just saw the opponent messaged us. Shout out to the Rage Quit. I guess that's an abbreviation for. This was a really nice opponent who asked me if I was Sol Malka, and I said, I am not Sol. I am Grimflayer MTG. And this guy's like, oh, that's where I recognize your name. My brother is a big fan. So shout out to the Rage Quit and to the Rage Quit's brother. And meanwhile, the opponent is developing their mana, and we are about to set it back a couple turns, because we do draw the swamp, thankfully. Immediately Fulminator, just of course to grow the Goyf as well, as it just being the right play, and obviously that's just amazing for us. We've got Unearth in hand, and the opponent plays a Forest, probably playing around Unearth and or more copies of Fulminator. So we draw Trophy, which is fine, but we'll lead on Inquisition. We see the opponent does have a lot of lands. Forest, another dual land, and a Vesuva. They've got Azusa, and they've got Rexage. So we don't really care at all about the Rexage. Pretty easy take there of Azusa. And nice turn, playing another Tarmogoyf, smashing in for 3. And passing it back to the opponent. Opponent's playing another Forest, again very cagily sequencing around Fulminator, but this is why the clock is so important, because they're intentionally slowing down their own development to play around our effects, and we just get to end the game with a couple of really aggressive Lurgoyfs. I mean, I've seen bigger. They're only 3/4, right? But still pretty good. Still a great clock. And there's no need to really do anything here, the Amulet's not a factor, we don't need to trophy that away. We could have aggressively cycled the Unearth, but obviously I still want to live the Fulminator dream, so we're just playing our land and passing. Opponent's going to play a Radiant Fountain, which I guess they're finally priced into playing a non-basic, and might as well be the one that gains them life, and that they probably are not the most heartbroken to lose. So that is the play. And then they play a Rexage just as a 2/1. So I could Field of Ruin that Radiant Fountain, but I would rather Stone Rain them than trade that in for a Forest. So I choose not to, and I draw Inquisition for turn. Okay, so we see that the opponent picked up a Gemstone Mine, otherwise we knew about that whole hand, and there's strike 1 against Inquisition as the predominant one of the 4-2 split. I know there are people who like it. I'm a big Thoughtseize fan in this deck. I think we can accommodate the life loss, and I just hate whiffing with discard. Like, discard is already bad enough when you top deck it and the opponent's hellbent. I can't stand to whiff too much on top of that, So that's just why I like the Thoughtseize in a little bit higher numbers. But either way, even though that's annoying, we still have the Goyfs clocking, we still get to Unearth the Fulminator, Stone Rain the opponent, and we've still got Extraction, Trophy in hand. Opponent's got another Amulet of Vigor. And they play that Simic Growth Chamber. Now, here's something I actually didn't mention that I was thinking of at the time that you should be thinking of. So, we saw Simic Growth Chamber in their hand. There's already one in the graveyard from our first activation of Fulminator Mage. We could have Surgical'd the Growth Chambers. And there's a strong argument that that's actually the correct play. But here's the thing. We know the opponent's going to have it. We didn't really know they were going to rip an Amulet of Vigor off the top. That's a little bit scary. And I believe the opponent messaged me in here and said if you hadn't Stone Rained me last turn, I would have lethal this turn, because Primeval Titan, if they could get it down, and then, you know, the double Amulet thing, I'm sure the opponent could put together lethal. Now, so the super safe play was probably to surgical the Growth Chamber there on their draw step. But even when they drew the second Amulet of Vigor, they didn't quite have enough mana to go off this turn. And what I was more worried about is the opponent finding some way to extend the game, right? Whether, you know, Colony Garden into Engineered Explosives the following turn, something like that. They wipe our Goyfs, we're left without a clock again, and then I have spent my extraction on a land, whereas this is a really good failsafe that I have in hand right now if the game goes wrong. Of course, they find a Titan, we can trophy the Titan, we can extract all Titans, and then the long game is probably going to be more likely to go in our favor, right? So I just wanted to point out that line. Extracting the Growth Chamber was live, but I deemed it to be not quite necessary, and the opponent got one of their best cards to, you know, that they could have ripped off the top to try to stay alive. Rather, you know, besides defensive cards maybe, and it still wasn't quite enough, so I guess that's correct, but worth definitely mentioning that line. But either way, what a difference a clock makes, right? What a difference a clock makes. We disrupted really well both Game 1 and here in Game 2, but the difference is we had a couple Goyfs early, and they just put the game away quick, so that felt much better. That's the type of progression you really want to try to assemble against a deck like this, and let's move on to Game 3. Alright, my friends, Game 3 on the draw, and the opponent has mulliganed yet again, which is really nice for us. We always love that, and especially with them having mulled, I think this is a definite keep. We don't have any of our very best cards, but it's tough to argue with Inquisition into Bob, with a functional land base, with some good consistency with Unearth. So the opponent goes turn 1 Forest, Sakura Tribe Scout. I would love to have a Fatal Push for that, which is why we keep a couple in. Sadly, we don't have that, but we do have Inquisition. And this might look to some people like, oh, this is sweet, they're totally out of gas. This is actually pretty terrifying to me, because triple Bounce Land alongside Sakura Tribe Scout is actually all the mana they're ever going to need. They're going to develop it quickly, and the instant speed ability of Sakura Tribe Scout can actually make it really tricky to interact with their land base, and then they're just live to top deck a bomb. So, you know, they mulliganed, and they have no spells in hand by the end of my turn 1, but I'm still a little bit worried. So, yeah, it's just Amulet Titan. It's a really interesting deck. Once again, I guess I'm just going to leave these lands around for now. And we draw another Bob, so sure, playing this Bob is obviously the way to go, and we'll just pass end step opponent. Flashes in a forest, then they're going to play a Simic Growth Chamber, bounce that forest. Now, what does Dark Confidant show us? Confidant shows us Field of Ruin, and we draw Trophy for turn. So, two very good cards in the matchup, but Sakura Tribe Scout actually, again, makes it really hard to interact with their land base because of that instant speed ability. So, what I'm going to do here is attack with Bob and actually offer the trade. Number one, because, like I said, the Sakura Tribe Scout is actually a really good card against us right now in this situation. Number two, we have a backup Bob and an Unearth on top of that, so I'm more than happy to take that trade. And I give the opponent credit there, because I think that's a really disciplined play not to block. I went ahead and ran out the Field of Ruin and decided to pass to hold up field. Debatable line, obviously just playing a second Bob and just saying, okay, do you have anything crazy this turn? Obviously that's pretty interesting too. But the opponent having another Sakura Tribe Scout is actually kind of punishing for us, you know. Kind of means we don't really get to do anything with our mana, so it's very possible we should have played another Bob there. We're continuing to draw well. We're continuing to hit painless flips off the Bob in action for our draw step, but again, we just kind of need answers to these scouts, or we need the opponent to not really have any gas in hand. So it's a bit of an awkward situation. And now the opponent will go ahead and finally tap a Sakura Tribe Scout. So here's our window for a Field of Ruin. And we're definitely going to take it. We hit the Simic Growth Chamber because choking them on blue mana for Talaria West is definitely valid. And it's just one of the only clean windows we're going to get for a good Field of Ruin. We still get to hold up Assassin's Trophy this way. So unfortunately, the opponent does just have 6 mana. And here comes the Primeval Titan. So Titan's going to do the Titan thing. Goes to get Boros Garrison and Slayer's Stronghold for that combo, but with no amulet, they cannot actually give it haste, so we will just simply be mana efficient, trophy away the Titan right now, and hope to untap and draw some... We've got so many live draws, so let's see what we get. We flip Kalitas, we draw Inquisition. So, honestly, shaping up to be... Like, this was our great window for a Surgical Extraction, for a Fulminator Mage, for even, like, Maelstrom Pulse on the Scouts might be reasonable, but let's see what we do. So we'll lead off, of course, on Inquisition. Think no matter what, that's going to be a pretty fine one. And here's strike 2 against the 4-2 split. We just see another Titan in hand. The opponent just has another Titan, and our Inquisition misses it. So that is just absolutely awful. We would be wary, but ahead if we had a Thoughtseize there to take away the Titan. But as is, we're now very, very, very far behind. What a difference that Inquisition versus Thoughtseize makes. So now I'm just in full-on defensive mode. The Tribe Scouts don't matter that much anymore because they just naturally have the Titan in hand. And they're doing all the ramping they want to do anyway. So we just leave our stuff back, play the Kalitas. And the opponent will tap, retap, complicated deck to pilot, and of course cast that Titan. Titan goes and gets Vesuva to make another bounce land, some redundancy with the red-white, another Simic Growth Chamber. So getting to kind of have it all and do it all, give the Titan haste. And here, it's Double Strike is not on the table, Double Strike is not live, so we're gonna take it. And now Double Strike's on the table, but it's not active this turn. So, yep, we take the hit. And, we're still drawing very live. We still need an answer to Titan, but we've got a lot of those in the deck. And we draw Thoughtseize a little too late and Field of Ruin. So, pretty rough. So, I play the Field of Ruin, and even though we've been sequencing around the Sakura Tribe Scouts, and the opponent's been sequencing well with them, like... I know they can blow out our Field of Ruin. They know I know. I still think we're not beating the Titan if it gets Double Strike, so I'm going to try to just hope they miss the line. We're going to try to field them off of Sunhome, and they do not miss the line. They've got another bounce land to flash in, basically, and bounce it, so our field fizzles. But we weren't really accomplishing anything much else this turn anyway. We just kind of drew things in the wrong order, didn't draw our very best cards. And the opponent having a second Titan was a beating, an absolute beating. So we play out our stuff and basically just hope the opponent, we can maybe just throw everything in front of it and maybe stay alive if the opponent doesn't have another payoff. But the opponent's tapping so much mana that it's got to be some other payoff. And it's a 5/5 Walking Ballista, which we just simply cannot beat. So we scoop with it on the stack. And that is rough. So... the way this game could maybe have gone differently is if on turn 3, instead of holding up the field and, hoping, basically both players were playing patiently on around that turn 3, turn 4 sequence. And I think, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of scenarios in which that would have worked to our benefit, because we did already have a Bob down. We were already drawing 2 cards per turn to their 1. We do have good forms of disruption in hand. The way the opponent's progression happened to be kind of punished me for playing a little bit cagily there. The way their progression happened to be and the way our progression happened to be, where we had a lot of cards, but none of them that really exactly stopped what they were doing. Like, We didn't have the Fulminator mages. We had Inquisition in a spot where we needed a Thoughtseize. We didn't kill the Sakura Tribe Scouts early, or at all in this game. So, I don't think it was strictly incorrect to play the field, but the way this game panned out, I should have maybe turn 3 played the field and then just played another Bob. You know, just draw 3 cards per turn. Now, obviously, against a lot of things, you know, different progressions on the opponent's side could have had me really regretting that. They play like a 3/3 Walking Ballista for 6 mana and ping both Bobs, and then I still have to deal with the Ballista. They have EE. Or the Bob flips are just so extremely painful that we're like losing to the first Titan hit, right? So a lot of ways that could have gone bad too. Again, in retrospect, with the way it played out, we had no chance of winning the way things happened here. If we had played the second Bob, maybe we would have. So, instructional moment, interesting moment, and a very interesting and well-played game. Again, the opponent was very conservative, very patient with their Sakura Tribe Elder activations. I think we could have slowed down a worse player more and perhaps gotten there, especially if our top decks had been a little bit kinder. But as it was, very close game, and unfortunately, we did start the league off with a loss, but that'll happen, and let's move on to round 2. Okay, so round 2, we're on the draw. We've got an unkeepable hand because it's only 1 land, and it's the Nurturing Peatland, so we gotta throw it back. So the ill luck from the previous round is potentially carrying over, but this is a really fine 6. Double Blooming Marsh, nice low curve, lots of interaction, Bob and Goyf, and Unearth, which I do decide to put on the top, because that can be whatever we need it to be. I think that's just a great one to top here. So, Flooded Strand Pass. I am suspicious here for, of course, blue-white control, which makes me really sad that I mulliganed. But Inquisition is the play no matter what we're against, and it turns out that it's not blue-white control at all. It is blue-white Spirit. So, the opponent's got a really well-balanced hand. They've got Remorseful Cleric for the main deckable Grave Hate, Selfless Spirit, of course, double Supreme Phantom, and Spell Queller. So a big part of me is tempted to take away the Queller because it's the least redundant piece in their hand, and it's very, very annoying against us. But knowing is half the battle, so between the fact that they don't have the third land yet, and the fact that they don't have a Vial, so they're really incentivized to tap out every turn, I decided to leave the Queller around in the hand and just take away one of the Supreme Phantoms. It's the least redundant piece in the hand, but ultimately, with our progression, I believe it to be correct. I don't care about Remorseful Cleric that much. Yes, it can sack and shrink my Goyf a little bit, but like, I'm just trying to kill all of their creatures anyway, so that's fine with me. So, the opponent goes Seachrome Coast, and indeed leads on the Cleric, which is the right one to lead on, because against a deck like ours, if we try to remove it, they can sack it, again, for a little bit of value. So, we're not going to remove it, we are going to play the Dark Confidant. Obviously, Goyf was live too, but having drawn Tireless Tracker for turn, I really want to curve out with my Bob. I really want to make sure we hit the land drops to make this hand amazing, because all of the cards in our hand are good. We just want to draw 2 spells per turn. And the only removal they have in this deck is probably Path to Exile, so if the Bob gets pathed, that kind of works to our advantage too. Remorseful Cleric will get in, Selfless Spirit is on the field, and it's back to us. Bob flips a Swamp, which is great, and we draw Liliana for turn, which is even better. So, that right there is enough to put me ahead. I consider myself to be far enough ahead now, and the spirits have so many synergies with the lords and the hexproof lock and all that stuff that I'm very happy to trade my Bob with a Selfless. So first up, we're going to offer that trade. And of course, even if they don't want to trade, getting in with the Bob is great. We are racing, and then Liliana is the best play here. We'll Edict away whatever they want, and it's the Cleric, so sure. Liliana's just probably going to die in the crackback, but she's mana efficient, and she gains us a little bit of life. Opponent's got a main deck Kira Great Glass Spinner. This is a really, really good card against us. The meta's not that interactive, so it's a little strange to see this main decked, but maybe blue-white instead of Bant has enough flex spots that they can main deck one, and that's indeed the play. So we flip Nile Spellbomb off of Bob, then draw Swamp for turn, so the Bob play on turn 2 really panned out. And we're continuing to pull ahead on resources. We're continuing to consider ourselves so far ahead that we're very happy to trade with Bob, especially with Kira, right? They don't take the block, rightfully so, but thankfully we have Abrupt Decay, which does trigger Kira's ability, but can't be countered. So the ability resolves, and then so does our spell. It's a beautiful thing. Very happy right now with playing a second Abrupt Decay. I think it's pretty sweet. And then, of course, we get a nice 5/6 Tarmogoyf to follow things up, so we're just having a really great progression here. And the opponent's got Deputy of Detention, so worth noting, as I said when we resolved our turn 1 discard, with no Ether Vial, they are, and with us having such a proactive start, they're not able to hold up Spell Queller. It's just a non-factor in this game, even though they hit the 3rd land. And they're racing us as best as they can with that Spirit, but they're going to have trouble racing the 5/6 Goyf, right? So we draw Collective Brutality, pretty good draw. We'll attack with the Goyf first, of course. Great for us if they block, fine with us if they don't. So they get hit for 5. And then afterwards, we're going to cash in the Unearth. Again, Path to Exile is their most likely removal. So we're probably not going to buy anything back this game, so we'll just cash it in for a redraw. And Collective Brutality is the play here. Again, I like keeping the board just as clear as possible. Selfless Spirit is a big pain in general against us, so it's a fine window to kill it. And this was not strictly correct. This is debatable, but I chose to pitch Nile Spellbomb to escalate and drain for 2. Just gives us even more of a buffer, so if they just have really explosive couple turns, we're advancing our clock and decreasing theirs, right? So also grows the Goyf that way too, whereas actually activating the Spellbomb might have shrunk it depending on what we did. But in any case, the opponent cracks back for 1. They play a Silent Clearing, so interesting to note they might actually be splashing black. And then they're passing, so now they're at the stage where their best option might be to hold up Spell Queller, but again, we're far enough ahead that we don't care. So we draw Fetch Land, which is a pretty good draw because it means we can just play into the Queller and then get Revolt and push it. So we'll attack with the Goyf. And we're going to do that. We're going to do exactly that. We're going to play out the tracker. If it gets quelled, we can push, and if not, we just have a tracker into Fetch Land, and indeed it's the Queller, sure. So the only bad thing about this is we don't get any clues off of the tracker this way, but I still think it's correct. We just stay so far ahead on board, and again, we're keeping the board as clear as possible. Very, very important principle against these spirits, because they can just kind of lock you out of the game after a time if their board is sufficiently wide with the right kinds of effects. So opponent's really on the ropes. They tap out for a Drog Skull Captain, or they nearly tap out. And then they play, and then they pass to us. So we draw Dark Confidant, sure. Any gas here is fine, but the opponent's got to have throw away their board here or have removal. So they assign blocks, and then they do have removal. They go to 1, tapping Silent Clearing for a Path on the Goyf. So I believe this to be a misplay from the opponent. I think they were supposed to path the tracker and then hope to basically draw another path next turn for Tarmogoyf, right? Because doing all this, especially before we leave blocks, means we get a land, means we get to crack a clue, which means that that's no longer a trade, but a chump block. So absolutely wonderful for us. And I played the tracker. Really doesn't matter. I mean, we're so far ahead. I guess maybe Bob might have been technically a better play in case they have another Deputy of Detention, but I imagine that's only like a 1 or 2 of especially main deck. But either way, the opponent's at 1, like we're in fine shape. But they're finding things to stay alive. They've got Wanderer into Phantom. And we find a Forest, which is just lovely. It rewards us for playing the tracker last turn, so this is just fun. Like, we're just going to win, and we're getting to have our fun along the way, because the opponent is very courageously playing this one out. And we're just cracking all the clues, hoping to find removal, I guess, but again, we're just kind of going to win on board as things stand. Opponent is priced into double chumping with their spirits, and then we play out. Again, you could be Bob, it could be Goyf, does not matter. Game 1, there's no way they have a way to come back from this. And indeed, after taking their draw, opponent will scoop. So, the decision, I believe, that won that game was playing Dark Confidant on turn 2 rather than Tarmogoyf. Like, we just identified early on that our hand was very powerful. We just needed to pull ahead on resources and hit our land drops while doing so, and Confidant is the very best way to do that. So, Bob's flips and the top of our deck was very kind. We curved out very well. The opponent's hand was strong, and their progression was very reasonable. They kept finding a good amount of gas off the top. They never really flooded, but we just absolutely crushed them because our progression was that strong. So, on a mulligan to 6 on the draw against Blue-White Spirits, that one felt really, really good. So, sweet game 1, and let's take a look at how we side against this. Alright, my friends, so against Blue-White Spirits, notably a little bit different from Bant, mainly because you don't want Grafdigger's Cage against Blue-White, whereas you probably do against Bant because Collected Company is their best card against us. So what do we like? Well, all 5 of these cards are great. Damnation, Lily, The Last Hope are both awesome. Collective Brutality is fine. They're better cards, but it's definitely worth bringing in. Plague Engineer, this is where this card shines, of course, against tribal decks, and EE is really, really nice, too. They've got a ton of 2-drops. You can obviously name it on 1 as well to hit Vials and 1-drops, which can be very impactful. So these 5 cards come in, and these 5 cards, I think, pretty freely come out. So far, we're not being rewarded for main decking the Nile Spellbomb, so 2 of those come out. I like cutting the Thoughtseize. And here's actually, admittedly, a matchup in which it is nice to be on the 4-2 split, leaving in all 4 Inquisition against this deck. Does feel pretty good. And I chose to trim away 1 Unearth. Like, it's possible they play Grave Hate out of the side. Even if they don't, most of their removal is exiling. They're flying, so there's not that much trading going on in combat, so I think trimming away 1 Unearth is fine, but leaving 1 is also fine as a, at worst case, it just cycles, right? So, another card to consider is Kalitas Trader of Get, which is basically going to come in against every creature aggro deck and every tribal deck, with the arguable exception of Spirits, depending on your 75. Again, simply because they fly, and he doesn't block up combat that well. And also, they have the potential to hexproof us out of the game, hexproof lock our removal out of the game anyway, which makes his other abilities also less effective. But Kalitas is still very, very playable. He's just not a slam dunk here like he is against like every other tribal deck. So I think submitting a 60 like this is totally fine. I also think playing Kalitas is totally fine. And on the draw, you could cut a Lily a little clunky on the draw. A Bob was a little bit of a liability on the draw. Those would probably be the first 2 things I like. Just, trim a Bob, trim a Liliana, call it good. One or the other. But in any case, any such configuration is going to look pretty good against the blue-white deck, and that's what we did. So let's go to game 2. Alright, so our opponent will once again keep 7 on the play, and our 7 is also a keep. It's really, really nice. We've got Push, Inquisition, Decay. Those are some of our best forms of early interaction. We've got nice Painless Mana, both colors. On the draw, we're very likely to hit our 3rd land by turn 3 for Liliana, so look at that. We don't even need the 3 turns. We just hit it on the first one, so the opponent went Hallowed Fountain Pass, and now we'll go Blooming Marsh Inquisition, and we see the opponent's got, again, a really nice hand. They've got 3 lands just like us. They've got both colors and some utility, and they've got a nice spread of spells. Deputy of Detention, Drogskull Captain. The Hexproof Lock should always, always, always be on your radar in this matchup, my friends. Phantasmal Image, which is a very strong card in these decks, and Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. So what do we take? Well, Deputy of Detention is a good card, but one that usually doesn't beat us because we play so much interaction. Unless they're already ahead, and Deputy is kind of like they've already forced us to spend all of our removal, and we haven't quite dealt with them, and then Deputy comes down for the coup de grace, basically, to really take over the game. But generally, it's not a card I take that aggressively with my discard. Thalia is obviously annoying sometimes, but right here, if they play her, we can just push her. So, no issues there. Phantasmal Image is a more reactive card, and a very, very high upside card, but very low floor as well. This thing will die to our Liliana, the Last Hope +1, for example. So I think the clear take here has got to be Drogskull Captain. I think it's the most individually powerful card, and the one with the ability to just, not single-handedly beat us, but I guess two-handedly beat us with another card by the same name. So opponent goes Island into Thalia. And back to us, we draw Collective Brutality, which is fine. We want to see that card early in this matchup. And I did just Fatal Push the Thalia. Now, if you're against humans, I think you want to say go, and then push the Thalia on their turn, maybe even after taking damage if you think you can afford to, just so they don't play another Thalia out of hand. But number one, we know their hand. That's very unlikely that they just top deck one. Number two, more importantly, we have to play around Spell Queller, so we just main phase our Fatal Push. Opponent goes Mutavault into Mausoleum Wanderer into Supreme Phantom. So those are two good draws they've had, and we know the rest of their hand, and they're curving out really, really well. We draw Damnation. So Damnation is a good one in the matchup, but we're a little bit far away from it, and it's also we're a lot far away from it, actually, because it's shut off by Mausoleum Wanderer. So I believe that, kind of like in Game 1, we just want to take the mana-efficient play here of using the Liliana to trade 1-for-1 plus gain us a little bit of life and have a really mana-efficient turn. So same principle at work there, and we do get rid of the Wanderer, which is nice, and that's actually what I preferred they sack, but they promptly top deck another one. So really, really good curve out from the opponent. Like, no doubting that. So they've got a couple Lords, they've got the Wanderer up at 4-4, and they get to go ahead and swing our Lily off the field. We draw Liliana, the Last Hope. So a good draw, no question about that. So what do we like? You know, we could try to aggressively hit more land drops by cycling Unearth. Obviously, Abrupt Decay is live. And obviously Liliana, the Last Hope herself is live. But what I chose to do here is to, I think no matter what, we've got to take a kill on a Supreme Phantom here. It's just going to be way too good of a clock if we let them have both Lords. So we either play the Last Hope or the Brutality. Either way, it's going to just die to its own Phantasmal Image trigger. We don't have to have something that actually does enough -X to kill it. And I chose to run the Brutality because I think Liliana the Last Hope's a really high value card in this scenario. I'm not as happy to use her as 1-for-1 plus life gain as I am Lily of the Veil. So I chose to do the Brutality instead, even though it was less mana efficient. Opponent found a Selfless Spirit. Again, their curve out continues to be really nice. Back to us, and we've taken 4. I guess we took 3 that turn. No, we took 4 because, yeah, that thing was buffed by the spirit. Sure. So we hit our 4th land, which is nice. No question about that. But I'm going to, of course, not just run my Damnation out into the Wanderer. Damnation is kind of being stymied in a couple different ways here, partially by the Wanderer countering it, and partially by the Indestructible of Selfless Spirit, so we might have to really work to make it a blowout, but in any case, we still get to have a really nice turn here, so we get to field away that Mutavault, which is definitely crucial with them being such an aggressor in the matchup, and then we get to Abrupt Decay. Once again, we're in a Decay main phase to play around Queller, and we tried to hit the Supreme Phantom because, again, the clock is really what worries us now, plus Phantom's buff makes Wanderer better. Opponent cashes in Selfless Spirit to protect their Phantom, and that's also kind of fine with us because, again, that Indestructible is an issue, so again, the principle of trying to keep the board as clear as possible. Opponent hits a land, finally not a good draw. They've got that Deputy of Detention still in hand, which I guess was another reason we didn't play the Liliana out quite so early. But now, we don't really have much of a better choice. I'm pretty happy to just, again, extend the game, slow the clock here, she's going to not only shrink the attacker, but also draw some attacks, unless they spend the Deputy of Detention, which is very possible. Either way, we're not just running her out into a certain death, like a certain permanent loss, and we've got to slow the clock down. And if they don't do anything about her, shrinking the Wanderer next turn can also make our Damnation live, which is really nice. So, lots of reasons to play her. They do run out the Deputy, which is probably just correct. And then here comes the hit for 1, so we have slowed that down a bit. And then it's going to be back to us, so end step we're going to go ahead and fetch out a basic forest and cycle away our Unearth looking for more action. And we found it. It's EE. Very ironic here because we've got 2 sweeper effects in hand, and right now both of them are only good for a 1-for-1, because with EE their CMCs are all across the spread, and with Damnation it's still going to be countered by Wanderer. So I actually really just wanted to draw an untapped land there, but instead we draw Goyf. So I'm just gonna, I'm just kind of priced into going EE on 1 here. I can't make EE on 3, and I care more at this point, I think, about taking out the Wanderer than I do about the Phantom. So, that's the play, and we just pass. Of course, we're not playing the Tarmogoyf because he doesn't block that well against the Flyers, and we're planning to go on the Damnation plan, so we sandbag the Goyf. And then before damage, as they go to attacks, we'll crack the EE, kill the Wanderer. And then the opponent has a Seachrome Coast that they play, and they're passing. So, 1 unknown in hand, obviously we're always worried about Spell Queller, but at this point, I think it's going to be correct to just try to play into it. So we draw a Swamp. Would have been better to draw that last turn, but that's fine. We'll still play it. We'll go for the Damnation. Damnation resolves. Beautiful. So, Lily the Last Hope will tick up. Milling is super aggressive right there. I don't think it's correct, so we just tick her up to keep her loyalty high. Eventually, of course, maybe get to ult her, but even more realistically than that, just to keep the loyalty high as a way to continue controlling the board is nice. Opponent plays a Flooded Strand and passes, so they are flooding out, but the last card in hand was removal, so Path on our Goyf during the upkeep, and then we draw a land, so pretty bad draw for us as well, but we do have a Liliana on field, and we're in a top deck war. Opponent plays an Aether Vial, so another poor top deck. We get another land, but hey, look at that. It is Nurturing Peatland. We get to immediately cash it in, and we find Liliana of the Veil. So how about that? Nurturing Peatland coming in the clutch, and both Lilianas tick up. It's a Liliana tribal time. Now I cannot imagine a world in which we lose from here. So end step, the opponent will fetch, take their draw, and then pass back to us. We draw Tarmogoyf, so we're just going to run it out. If they've got a Queller, we can Edict. And sure enough, that's what happens. So we allow all those triggers and creatures to resolve, then we Edict away the Queller. We tick up our Last Hope. She is an ultimate threshold. And then we pass. Opponent will draw, opponent will pass. So, as good as she is against spirits, I think it's correct to just simply cash in Lily the Last Hope. We've got the emblem. Always feels good. Let's hit for 6 with a gigantic Tarmogoyf. No blocks, no effects, no spells. So, because we're going to take the Liliana up anyway, let's go ahead and trophy the Vial away first. That will resolve. Okay, so nothing's vialed in. So let's take up the Liliana. And now, in response, they will flash in a Rattle Chain. So that's one of the only ways they could have actually resolved a creature this turn through all of those effects, was to have something with natural flash. So good disciplined sequencing from the opponent. However, we're very far ahead, and they rip another land. So the opponent's flooding. They're even priced into attacking our Liliana. So Peatland is the play. We'll cash it in. We'll get a Tarmogoyf. We'll take up our Liliana, and we will swing for 10, putting the opponent to 3, making 4 more zombies, and there's just nothing they can have. They scoop it up after seeing their top of the deck. So that was a great kind of palette cleanser from the Amulet Titan matchup. This is a more, traditional creature-based deck that our deck probably in general is a little bit better against than a big mana deck like Amulet Titan. more importantly, we curved out really, really well. And the reason I kept saying how good the opponent's top decks were and how coherent their curve outs were is because I wanted to draw your attention to just how solid their progressions really were. The only really better things they could have had were like ether vials, realistically speaking. And of course, maybe the hexproof lock at the right time, but in any case, they had really reasonable curve outs in both games. We just kind of crushed them, frankly. Really, really strong board states by the end of both games, so definitely a nice one, and I personally have never liked the look of the Bant Spirits deck. My buddy Nate, who I mentioned earlier, plays Spirits, and I'm like, Bant Spirits was putting up all the results. I just have never believed in it. I've said that on this channel repeatedly. I don't know that the Coco and the Vial together is going to be the way to build Spirits. And I think Blue-White is starting to become more trendy. And maybe people are starting to agree with what I've been saying, that Blue-White is a little bit more of a coherent deck. Maybe a little bit cleaner, a little bit more painless. That's an important thing in this meta. However, for us, I think this Blue-White matchup is definitely easier. Just the mere fact that we don't have to deal with the bomb of Collected Company is huge for us. So I think this matchup is definitely fine, and we're showing it here. Really nice 2-0 win. Good games well played, and let's move on to round 3. Alright, my friends, a repeat of the game 1 of last round where the opponent keeps 7 on the play and opens on a Leyline of the Void as well. Just shows you where the meta's at right now, I guess. Game 1 Leyline. And I decided that I didn't want a mulligan anymore, and I decided to keep a risky 1-lander. So this is a lot less risky on the draw than it would be on the play, because, of course, we're seeing one more card. But I think the payoffs are here. Double Inquisition, Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant, Abrupt Decay. Like, we have a really low curve. It's a lot of the very best things that we could hope to see in a blind game 1. So risky, without question. I don't want to sugarcoat that. This is a risky keep, but well, we rip yet another good early payoff, but it's not the second land. So turn 1, Blooming Marsh, Inquisition U, and we see, well, I don't know what I was expecting when the opponent went turn 0 Leyline, turn 1 Island Pass, but I guess it's Living End. So this is some kind of a blue or blue-black Living End deck. I guess blue-black because they have this dual land. Striped Riverwinder and double Cryptic Command, so it's a little bit more controlling than the normal Living End versions, and I think there's not much in Magic that's a worse matchup than the traditional Jund Living End, so I'm at least happy that it's this variant, but no Living End deck is really what we want to see, right? So the only legal take we have with our Inquisition is the Namesake card. That's what we'll do. End step, the opponent cycles a Striped Riverwinder into a Street Wraith, then cycles away the Wraith, finds an island, plays it, passes back to us, and we draw a land, Rewarded. So obviously, Thoughtseize we know is live because they have double Cryptic Command in hand, and that's actually why I'm choosing not to play discard, because Inquisition could still whiff, so I think I want to take the proactive line of making a creature here on turn 2, and then next turn, not only do we know our Thoughtseize is going to be good, but our Inquisition is potentially more likely to be good next turn as well. So, all things considered, I think it's correct to play a creature there, and I went with the Bob over the Goyf. As things stand exactly right now, the clock is just as good. Granted, Goyf will probably grow more in this matchup, but I just want to keep seeing cards. Really just want to keep seeing cards. The opponent plays that River of Tears, and they also found an As Foretold, which is what allows them to cast Living End for free without having to build their deck around the Cascade mechanic, I guess. So Bob is, once again, just like in a previous game, we're rewarded for that turn 2 Bob because he's finding us the lands. And we'll go ahead and begin with Thoughtseize. We see Cryptic Command ×2 and a Striped Riverwinder. So nothing that our Inquisition can take. So we're going to go ahead and fetch. And we are simply going to take care of that As Foretold with our Abrupt Decay. I think that's definitely correct. We don't want to give them the ability to cast a Living End if they find it, right? So opponent draws no 4th land drop, they pass to us. Bob flips a Goyf, we find Nurturing Peatland. Our life total is getting nice and low, but I don't know how much that matters in this matchup. Probably not all that much. Seems like they're probably not going to beat us by hard casting things now that we have such an immense resource advantage, so they're either going to go off or they're not. So we play the Peatland, we play the Goyf, or we attempt to play the Goyf, I should say. The opponent will counter it with a main deck Archmage's Charm, very spicy. And that is fine. We've got another Goyf where that came from. So, good find, though, from the opponent. And now the opponent finds a 4th land to have their Cryptics online. So, another good find. So let's move to attacks. See what we can do. And they choose not to press the panic button on their Cryptic command just yet, so we are going to get in for 6. Then we're going to crack the Peatland. So, interesting spot here. Obviously, there are a few different things we could do here. We could just pass, but I don't like just passing because then we give them the line of like Cryptic command to bounce our Tarmogoyf and then draw, and I don't want to have my clock set back that far. So I would rather cast into a known 2-for-1 Cryptic command than let them have the tempo play. But in any case, they do allow the Bob to resolve. And I also chose to play the Bob over the Goyf because the Goyf is like a snap. Is more likely to actually get countered. The Bob maybe gives them a more interesting decision, right? So the opponent, though, very disciplined with the Cryptic, chooses not to use it at all. Instead, will cycle the Riverwinder and simply take their turn. Field of Ruin is the find, kind of a non-factor at the moment, and then they'll pass. And the Bob flips a Flare and a Forest. So now our life total is getting nice and low. Obviously, we have to worry about the Bob triggers as well. Greatness at any cost and all that. Nile Spellbomb was our draw for the turn. So that was an awesome one. And we're just going to move to attacks, of course, pricing them into using the Cryptic to tap down and draw, which is a very good play for them, but also clears the way for us to resolve our Nile Spellbomb. And I decided to go ahead and just do it right then and there. I have no idea what these Living End decks play, these like, blue-black Living End decks. They could be playing some really spicy stuff, like, not necessarily Trickbind, but Trickbind style effects to counter the Spellbomb. Now, admittedly, I kind of had my sequencing a little bit backwards here, so I could have Inquisition first to see. So maybe that would have been correct. Our Inquisition whiffs, which is bad, and we see another Cryptic command, which is bad. So that's pretty annoying, to be honest, but we'll go ahead and play out another Grimflayer and just add to the board. It's worth noting that our Goyf is now a 0-1, so we don't quite have lethal yet, but maybe we can manage to put lethal together if we ever get to attack again. Opponent will field our Tomb. We'll go get a basic, and we'll pass, and they've got Cryptic live. So the Bob flips are moderately painful, Inquisition and Tarmogoyf. We're down to 5. So we're going to go ahead and move to attacks. And this was extremely disciplined from the opponent. So, obviously, one line here would have been to, just Inquisition them again, just to get a sorcery in the yard, even though we know it's going to whiff. Or to, pulse the Leyline, just, again, to grow the Goyf and force them into the Cryptic. I was like, I'm at 7, and I'm green-black. Or, I'm sorry. I have 7 power on the field, and I'm green-black. There's no way the opponent allows me to go to attacks. There's just no way. If I have an Assassin's Trophy for the Leyline or something, then that is just going to grow the Goyf into lethal. But extremely disciplined play from the opponent, just, making us have it. So I guess there's something to be said for that. So this stuff, it's some of it's decent, some of it's not, but Nile Spellbomb is really the card that I'm interested in. So the other two go to the bottom, Spellbomb goes to the top. I could have, and under many circumstances, would have fetched before that Flare trigger resolved, just so I don't have to potentially shuffle away my stuff on top. but the 1 point of life is really what's preventing me from doing that. So I went ahead and another thing I could have done is run out the Lily to try to, bait out counter magic, but again, I just kind of expected that the opponent would tap down and draw. Really did. But anyway, we get to resolve the Liliana. And Leyline goes to the yard, and it's back to the opponent. So, once again, we're kind of at the mercy of the Bob trigger, so we take one, as known, from the Spell Bomb, and then we take another 3 from Tracker, so the Bobs have been ridiculously painful. And again, the opponent's really disciplined play from last turn paid off. Could have gone horribly wrong, again, if we had a trophy or something, but hey, it paid off, right? So, now we move to attacks. Now, of course, they have to Cryptic us down. We still have all of the positive resource advantage in the world, and once again our Inquisition whiffs. This is like the 5th time in the league the Inquisition has whiffed. Admittedly, here Thoughtseize would just be dead in hand, but you understand my point. We're whiffing a lot with these Inquisitions. The evidence here doesn't make me want to move away from the 3-3 split that I've been playing, but in any case, we go ahead and pulse away both of our own Dark Confidants, just so we're not dying to that. And then we tick up our Lily. We're just continuing to pitch Tarmogoyfs, basically. We don't really need more creatures. Play a land and pass. Opponent can hardcast a Street Wraith, but that's not going to save them, and they just go ahead and scoop. So, yeah, that was quite the interesting game. Quite the interesting game, and very, very crucial couple decision points there. But in the end, we did come out ahead, and main deck Nihil Spellbomb. Main deck Nihil Spellbomb was absolutely awesome. Now, admittedly, maybe they wouldn't have comboed off anyway, because we took away Living End with this card, and we took away As Foretold with Abrupt Decay, so they would have had, I guess, to find both of their combo pieces to go off before we killed them. So, but Spellbomb, obviously against a Living End deck, made it so that even if they were able to assemble the combo, it was simply not going to be that effective. It would have just kind of been a sweeper rather than a game-winning combo. So, in any case, a very interesting game, winning at exactly 1 life. Dark Confidant doing just enough for us, and then having to be dealt with, right? Just couldn't risk it. And yeah, so great game 1. Good to take a win off of any variant of this Living End archetype, which is very, very tough for us to beat under most circumstances. And let's take a look at how we should be sideboarding against Blue-Black Living End. Alright, my friends, so Blue-Black Living End is definitely more of a fringe archetype. Arguably you're most likely to see the Electro-Dominance versions of Living End, and then of course traditional Jund Living End is probably still more popular than this Blue-Black deck. And altogether, all Living End decks are kind of fringe, even if you count them all as one, so I might not have the absolute perfect sideboarding down against Blue-Black Living End, but I'll show you what my thoughts are. You can, of course, always let me know what yours are. So, against Jund Living End, traditional Living End, Fulminator Mage is one of your best cards. You can sack it, you can try to take them off of a color, they play a ton of non-basics, and, of course, it gets returned to the field, getting you value on both ends when they Living End, right? So, that's cool. And Liliana of the Veil is one of our worst cards against traditional Jund Living End because you'll just never deal with their wide board using Edict effects after they go off, and +1ing usually helps them more than it helps us. And her -2 early game before they combo does nothing. So I don't think either of those things are true from what I saw in Game 1 against this variant. I think they're playing Cryptic commands in it's not a 1-card combo, it's a 2-card combo with As Foretold. They might play other things along As Foretold that work well with As Foretold, like Ancestral Vision. So I think we actually want to leave Lily in, and I don't know how good Fulminator is. I only saw River of Tears as a reasonable target. Like, they play fields too, but we're probably not ever going to really be able to hit a field with Fulminator. So, what I think is probably correct here is to bring in Hand Disruption, especially stuff that hits non-creatures. So, Duress and Collective Brutality can both take away Living End, As Foretold, Cryptic Command. Those are the big ones we want to hit. Surgical Extraction is more Graveyard Hate, and ultimately they are still a Living End deck, so I think that's definitely correct. And choke. They showed me a lot of basic islands. I'm going to play the choke. They're trying to take the game long. We'll choke them out. Worth reminding everybody that Grafdigger's Cage does nothing against the card Living End, because the cards move from graveyard to exile and then from exile to the battlefield. So that totally routes around the hate of Cage. So I think these 5 coming in is definitely correct. And these 5 coming out is pretty correct. They might play like a 4-drop or 2, whatever that card is it Curator of Mystery, something like that. I still don't think Fatal Push is very good until I see something that tells me otherwise. And I'm going to cut an Unearth, if I have creatures in the graveyard, I probably want them to stay there if they're looking likely to combo off, not buy them back. Again, you can leave them in because they cycle, but I think the rest of our deck is better. Now, the only question is whether we play Fulminator or not, and if so, what we cut. But I believe for, having only seen a small number of non-basic lands, I decided to run with Choke as the land hate, leave Fulminators out, and play something like this. Alright, so here in Game 2, our opponent will keep 7, as will we. I think our hand, again, keeping in mind the specific nature of their variant, is pretty solid. Against traditional Living End, this hand would be awful. Yeah, obviously Choke wouldn't be in, but you understand the point. Like, the traditional Thoughtseize into Goyf into Lily Curve is terrible against Jund Living End, which is why it's such a hard matchup for us. But against Blue Living End, I think it's actually pretty solid. And we of course do have a significant hate card as well. So I like this keep, even though it doesn't have any graveyard hate. And we draw another discard spell. Okay. Not necessarily what I would say I'm in the market for, but it's probably going to be a pretty good draw. Blooming Marsh, leading on Inquisition, feels good to get that remand out of their hand, that is for sure. And we will pass over to the opponent, but not before they cycle a Striped Riverwinder. And that's what their hand is. It was triple Riverwinder and 2 lands, so definitely a Living End hand, and we draw another Goyf. Again, not what I was in the market for, and I think it's actually better here to Thoughtseize than to play a Tarmogoyf, because we really want to make sure we've got either Choke or Liliana live to be cast next turn. So that means we, to be sure to not have to depend on top-decking a black land that enters untapped, we've got to play the Quagmire this turn. Therefore, we'll Thoughtseize now. We see Street Wraith in their hand. I guess that's probably the better take. Just forcing them to actually spend mana to cycle. I don't think the life loss is very game-breaking against us or anything. So we take the Wraith, they cycle both of the Riverwinders, untap, play a River of Tears pass to us, we draw Swamp. So we have cleared the way for our big bombs with a couple of discard spells. The problem is all that cycling means they have seen 3 new cards. So do we risk getting our payoff cards countered? I would say yes. The only thing they could have that I've seen that's a hard counter is Archmage's Charm. It's definitely better to just try to resolve it now before they're on Cryptic Command mana. So I think I rate Choke more highly than Liliana, and we'll try to just jam the Choke, and hey, it resolves. Beautiful. So opponent's got another River of Tears, playing around the Choke nicely, but we still got the Choke down. So interesting call here. We could go, of course, double creature, Goyf plus Flare, or we could go Liliana. I chose to go Liliana. Obviously pros and cons to both, but at the end of the day, they're like a control deck and a Living End deck. I think running them out of resources like this, especially because we have a lot of Grave Hate, is totally fine. And they don't necessarily show signs of having more creatures, and even if they do, like, they're not choked on really anything right now except the ability to tap low, and then untap fully. So, in other words, getting a Cycler out of their hand is fine. If they just pitch a Cycler to Liliana, that's good for me. Instead, they pitch an island, so sure. Play another island, so they've got lots of lands. And they are tapping for this. They are suspending a Living End. They are, trying to hardcast a Living End. Very, very interesting. So what do we do here? Well, I'm going to go ahead and take up with the Liliana, pitching a Tarmogoyf. And so here's my reasoning. Like, we are hoping to, and we get another living end out of their hand. That's pretty cool. We're hoping to just have a board that's big enough to compete when the living end eventually resolves, if we're not already in a great position by then. We are pitching a Goyf because Goyf is a 4/5. Their River Winders are 5/5s. If we can just grow the Goyf by one more point, including by sacrificing our own Liliana, then the Goyfs actually outsize their board, and them even getting to resolve their combo piece is potentially not that big of a deal. Now, if we wanted to really go all in on that plan, we could also cast Collective Brutality here and escalate pitching the Grimflayer. That is an option. But instead, we're going to go ahead first, at least, and Field of Ruin away a River of Tears. This does turn on a Remand for a turn, but then they'd be totally choked out if they use that, so I'm fine with that. And then we're going to play the Flayer out. I think pitching the Flayer is a little bit of guaranteed value, but getting the few points of damage over the Flayer and filling up our graveyard for when the Living End comes off suspend is better. But obviously that's an interesting judgment call. Opponent's got River of Tears. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and lead on the Collective Brutality to clear the way because we drew one of our best cards, Nile Spellbomb. Opponent's got Talaria West in hand, so we get to do it all. We get to play the bomb, we get to tick up with the Lily, and then we get to attack with the Flayer. We connect. We see a similar 3 cards to what we saw before, and once again we're binning 2 and putting a Nile Spellbomb on top. So, if I was following the same axiom as I was last game, I would have just cracked the Spellbomb then and there, but here, for whatever reason, I was feeling more confident and I chose not to. So they go ahead and play the River Winder, or cycle the River Winder, and end step I am going to just be mana efficient and cantrip with the Spellbomb. But the opponent, they cycled into a Nimble Obstructionist, which does get to counter our Nile Spellbomb. So very, very punishing for us, and that's why in game 1 I just main phased it, and that I guess technically I should have main phased this here too. But again, I was feeling more confident, partially because we do know we have another Spellbomb on top. So we get to cantrip into our other Spellbomb, totally empty our hand, everything's still fine. We've got the Lily ult, we've got the choke, like, we're just so far ahead. So, the opponent just scoops to that. So, I am glad, though, that that happened, because it does show you something to consider playing around when you are against these blue Living End decks. Like, don't fire off the Spellbomb just while they're totally tapped out if it's a suboptimal time. Like, it can be definitely correct to make them have it, but in the Game 1 situation, and arguably here, even though we had a backup Spellbomb, or maybe even precisely because we had a backup Spellbomb, it's maybe correct to do it, like, before they can get an Obstructionist. So either I would have done it on my own main phase after I casted it, or maybe in response to the cycling ability would have been really optimal. Although that does give them a window to have top-decked the Obstructionist rather than the River Winder. But when they cycle, part of the cost that's paid is the blue mana and the discard. So this is in the yard, and then the draw the card is the ability that goes on the stack. So you could really get, that is a really good spot to get them with a Spellbomb. Again, if we're playing around the Obstructionist, which, you know, obviously that's a really fringe thing, but I think it's worth knowing. We get our little percentage points that way. But in any case, we had it all, my friends. We had a couple of Goyfs in the graveyard in case they ever did manage to Living End. We had the Flayer stacking up our yard. We were hosing their graveyard. We've got a Liliana ready to ultimate. We've got Choke. We've just got it all. So a nice, clean 2-0. Admittedly, maybe not that clean, because we were at 1 life when we won game 1, but a really nice 2-0 against what I imagine is the best variant for us to face of the worst archetype. So living end decks we never ever want to see, but this blue-black, more controlling as foretold version seems more beatable, but, maybe they just didn't see their ancestral visions, and it could have been a very different game if they did. But in any case, we got there. We advanced to 2-1 in this league. I hope you're enjoying this league, my friends. I enjoyed playing it, and I'm enjoying revisiting it as well with you. So I hope you'll stay with me as we move in to round 4. All right, my friends, we are on the play once again after being on the draw a couple times, and this hand is very, very medium. It's weak. It's maybe a keep because we've just got Inquisition into Goyf, and you can't ask for a better 1-2 punch in a blind game 1 on the play than those 2 cards. The rest of the hand does absolutely nothing, but it's a functional hand. It's got a good start for a blind game 1. It is still definitely viable to throw it back simply because it's so light on guess, but I did choose to keep, and the opponent mulliganed, so hopefully we will get to be rewarded for this keep. The opponent, in fact, mulliganed all the way down to 5, and guess what? It is Hogaak Vine, the deck that all the chatter has been about, one of the major reasons we pivoted to main deck Nile Spellbomb. And we see a very interesting hand. So, Insolent Neonate is one of the best enablers in the deck, specifically very, very nice with Bridge from Below. Not only a general way to get that card, but specifically has really nice synergy with it, because first the Bridge is discarded, then the Neonate is sacrificed, so you immediately get a zombie off of this, and then you draw a card. It's all great. It's all great. So, and then of course they have 2 copies of Altar of Dementia. So, sacrifice a creature, target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of their library into the graveyard, and of course with the new tech, this is new tech to Modern, combining with the other new tech of Hogaak means that the opponent can realistically mill you out with this deck. So, full disclosure here, I have never played against this deck before this match, so it's brand new. The lists are in flux. People don't really in general know how to play against it, and I am probably no exception, right? Because this is literally my first time out against it. But I chose to take the Neonate. It's just their proactive turn 1 play. It actively rewards them for drawing a lot of other cards that might otherwise kind of sit in hand for a minute. So we draw Inquisition. Very, very tempting to just Inquisition away an Altar of Dementia, but since they have 2, I think I'd rather just play the Tarmogoyf here. We know that our Inquisition should be able to hit something next turn anyway, so we'll just be proactive. Try to end the game. Against these graveyard decks in general, Tarmogoyf can be one of our very best plays. Doesn't stop them from going off or anything, but if the rest of our disruption can, then the Goyf is going to get huge and can hopefully end the game before it gets out of control. So the opponent found a Carrion Feeder, and they play a Carrion Feeder, which is another sacrifice outlet that gets huge, rather than an Altar of Dementia, which is probably the correct play, but they are going to get punished for it because we drew another Inquisition. So the discard is showing up big this game, and we see the opponent drew a Bridge from Below, so I am very, very rewarded for taking away the Neonate. And now we just get to go ahead and rip up their hand, take away both altars, and the opponent just scoops to the second discard spell. They've got a 1/1 that can't block and a Bridge from Below in hand. Now, granted, they're still 5 turns away from dying. We've got a good clock, and we've got 3 cards in hand, so we're very ahead. But, the opponent doesn't know that we're out of gas, and they could, in theory, have drawn out of it. But, hey, the opponent just thinks they're beaten, and that's good enough for me. So, a very nice Game 1 win against a very explosive deck that's now the terror of the format. But as you can see, Game 1, they're mulliganing for a busted opening. Eventually, they just keep one that's got some of the pieces but not others down at 5, and boom. We rip their hand to shreds with Inquisition. We stick a Tarmogoyf, and that's just something they can't beat. So, we didn't even need the graveyard hate in Game 1. We just needed interaction and a clock. Obviously, this is not representative of how the matchup can go. They could have had a wider variety of payoffs and enablers that we couldn't disrupt. They could have had a more explosive start, blah, blah, blah. But here's one way, at least, that we can get there. So, again, I'm no expert on this matchup, but I will take you to the sideboard and show you what I did. Alright, my friends, so against Hogaak Vine, the new terror of Modern, what do we do? Well, this is an open question, so I am officially soliciting your feedback. Many of you probably have more experience against the deck than I. Again, this was my first time playing it. I haven't played since. So, and of course the lists are changing and all that stuff. But here's what I think is pretty much correct. I like all 6 of these cards. You know, a lot of people say that the traditional graveyard hate is not sufficient to stop this deck, or it's not as good against this deck as it is against other graveyard-dependent decks, and that's probably true, but it's still good. It's all still a role player. It all still shuts down at least a part of their engine, so that goes for Cage, for Extraction, and for Kalitas. I do like Engineered Explosives. This can actually kill Altars of Dementia if that becomes relevant, but it also just wipes out their entire zombie board of tokens, which is mainly why we want it in there. And Plague Engineer, I think he's better against Dredge than he is against this Bridgevine deck, but still has kind of a similar role, and I definitely did bring him in here. I need to, again, let the list settle and analyze them to see exactly how good Engineer is going to be and get more experience in the matchup, but I think it's at least playable. I also think that these 5 cards are pretty easy cuts. This is one way where it's just like Dredge, where Liliana the Veil just seems pretty unplayable. Tireless Tracker, I think we can pretty clearly slim down on our clunkiest threat here. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting, because what do we think about Duress? I mean, we saw how crucial it was to take Altars of Dementia out of their hand, and in general, being able to hit like Faithless Looting is fine, you know? I think Duress is definitely a reasonable one. Collective Brutality, maybe a little bit less appealing, but I still put it in there. I also have it over here in the cards to come out, so this is one of those that can kind of be a filler, I think, based on your 75. Like, if you don't have enough cards to bring in, you can leave your Brutalities in. If you have not enough cards to bring out, your Brutalities can come out. That's how I'm seeing it at this point. And then we also have Damnation to consider, again, just an out to, like, a Hogaak plus a bunch of zombies. Obviously, they can potentially get the former back, but still, a board sweeper is worth considering. And then it's like, how highly do we rate Fatal Push? Probably not all that highly. I think stuff like, in Dredge, I like Push more than some people do, because it's an incremental battle a lot of the time. You push an early creature, you eat it with an ooze, you can win the game incrementally like that. I don't see that being as much of a factor here, and I'd rather keep Decays and Trophies in, because this can kill the big boy, and they both can kill the altar. So, I don't know. Again, a lot to figure out with how precisely to side against this matchup, but if we just say that let's say for the sake of argument, we want to take out all 5 of these cards, then we would be a little bit short of cards to bring in. So that would mean Damnation and Duress could definitely come in. Then maybe we bring in the Collective Brutalities and just play with those. Or maybe we hedge, 1 Brutality, 1 Push. I like to hedge. Or we could bring back the Tracker and have just a high threat density, have a little Flood Insurance. We could play Liliana the Last Hope as a grindy value piece if we plan to take the game long. Also, I think Fulminator Mage is not the most unreasonable, because they seem to need 2 mana to do much in the deck. They pretty much do need 2 mana to really be operational. And, with them kind of a painful mana base, kind of a clunky one, and a low land count, it is a greedy mana base. It is able to be punished by Fulminator. Just from looking at it, I doubt that this is a really good plan, but if you're like at 58 cards and don't know what else to do, especially on the play, maybe you consider Fulminator Mage, but I definitely didn't bring them in here. So I would say that with my 75 and with exactly 1 match worth of experience in the matchup, you should play these 58 cards plus 2 from this category. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that we're hedged with this, whatever. In any case, your deck would then look something like that, and yeah, of course, let me know what you think, and let's then move on to Game 2. Game 2 on the draw, my friends, and our Bridgevine opponent will mulligan. I like our hand. It's, I've seen better, but we do have a piece of Grave Hate that is free to cast, and we've got a couple discard spells, which took us a really long way in Game 1. We don't have the most proactive clock. Our only clock is Plague Engineer, but I'm never mad to see this guy. If you bring him in, you gotta feel good about seeing him in any matchup, right? Very, very cool new tech. I'm still really excited about that card. Opponent has no turn 1 play. We draw Dark Confidant, so there's our potentially proactive turn 2 play. We'll have to see what the opponent's up to, and Inquisition is the very best way to do so. So we see Verdant Catacombs, Marsh Flats, the Arisen Necropolis himself, Bridge from Below. I think they've got mismatched bridges. I don't know about that. Necrotic Wound. Client's lagging. Alright, there we go. Necrotic Wound. So this is basically a removal spell that's very efficient in the opponent's deck. And Stitcher's Supplier, which right now is the only enabler, the only way for them to get things in the graveyard, and they chose not to run it out there on turn 1, so I believe that to be the correct take. Obviously, taking Bridge from Below is terrible. Never do that unless you're going to extract them all. Even so, it's usually better to force them to spend resources to get it in the yard and then extract it, right? But anyway, can't take the Hogaak, so it was either that or a Necrotic Wound to clear the way for Bob, which admittedly was interesting, but I think we're supposed to take the Enabler. That said, the opponent promptly rips another Enabler off the top in the form of everybody's favorite card, Faithless Looting. They pitch Bridge and Vengevine, so it's looking like a good old-fashioned Bridgevine progression at the moment, before Horizons, but they don't have anything else. It's back to us. And we draw Field of Ruin, so hitting the third land is decent. Definitely nice. And we'll Inquisition again. We see Insolent Neonate and Necrotic Wound. And once again, I kind of like taking the Enabler there. And we couldn't play the Confidant this turn anyway. We got 2 creatures in hand. Neither of them are things that we must keep around. It's not like we have Scoozes in hand or something. So, it would have been nice to take the Necrotic Wound again, but I don't think we really need to. So end step, the opponent fetches, and do we need to Surgical anything? So, there's a lot of prime targets in here. Obviously, Bridge from Below and Vengevine are both the big ones. But right now, Hogaak is, if he's going to be a factor, he's going to be delving a lot of things away. I think, again, no expert against this deck, but I feel right now that it's correct to just play reactively, to hold things up, specifically Surgical, of course, to hold it up, to wait, to see what the opponent does. And they don't do anything. No land drop, no play. Back to us. So, end step, we'll get a Tomb, we draw Hissing Quagmire. And once again, I'm playing very, very reactively here. Holding up Trophy, holding up Surgical. Could have just run out the Bob there to trade with Necrotic Wound. Indeed, could have played Field of Ruin and run out the Engineer to do the same thing, but I chose not to. Opponent gets the third land, and if we wanted to Surgical Lootings, we would have done that with the fetch land on the stack, but I don't think that's correct, Sometimes against other decks, Surgicaling away looting is probably sweet. I don't think against this deck. They just have way too many payoffs that we need to hit, so they loot away Hogaak and Gravecrawler, but still no board presence on turn 4, which is nice for us, and we draw Thoughtseize. Now, one of the reasons I've been playing reactively is because I will eventually potentially draw another discard spell and clear the way for the Confidant, and that's exactly what happens here. Or the Plague Engineer, whatever we want. So, we take away the Necrotic Wound, we see a Nature's Claim, which is going to be totally dead in their hand for a while. It's really only great against our Grafdigger's Cage. If we get a Nile Spellbomb, we can just crack it, which is one of the reasons I love that card. But anyway, I value Bob more highly on an empty board than the Plague Man, so Bob it is. Again, still no need to panic. No need to panic. I'm not experienced in this matchup at all. But I still said, alright, every turn I was asking myself, do I need to Surgical? Answer is no, not yet. Opponent has another land drop, which is probably not very good for them. Confidant flips a Goyf. And we also found a Maelstrom Pulse. So now we're starting to pull really far ahead on resources. We're starting to put a really scary clock on the board, and once again, there's no need to play anything more aggressively than how we are. A 5th land for the opponent can't be good. And we have all kinds of insurance against a wide board now with EE in hand. We flip a swamp, so it's all very, very nice. We're going to go ahead and hit for 7. And the opponent's down to 4. Never forget how much damage these types of decks can take from their land base as well. That's helped with our clock. Then we'll play the Plague Engineer. So let's take a quick look here. You can name Elemental sometimes against a lot of Venge Vines. If you're trying to name Avatar, you're probably in trouble, but naming Vampire to keep Insolent Neonates off the board is really interesting, especially early on. But, of course, the vast majority of the creature types in the deck are zombies, including Gravecrawler and Bridge from Below tokens. So, I blind name Zombie, who knows, but that's probably fine there. Either way, it shouldn't really matter. We are presenting lethal if Goyf or either of the 2 other creatures connect, and now if even one of them connect, it's lethal because the opponent fetched twice to thin out, takes their draw step and scoops it up. So we, once again, beat this deck on the back of discard spells without even having to use Graveyard Hate. Now we have, of course, one of the reasons our hand was good, and one of the reasons we were able to sequence so slowly is because we did have the Graveyard Hate in hand. We were able to patiently play around the Necrotic Wound until we could discard it out, and then take over the game with Bob, and then play Goyf and Engineer and all that stuff, right? And again, I don't want to say that this is representative. These were progressions that were vulnerable to discard that our opponent ended up with, and we also happened to have the discard and draw into it as well. So we had some good draws. The opponent had some draws that could maybe have been good in a parallel universe, but were not good against what we were up to. So I don't want to sell the power of the opposing deck short. Everybody's panicking about it. There's already calls for bans. I'm sure that's premature, but nevertheless, we do have to respect the power of that deck. But hopefully this showed you a way to get victory against this. And again, we didn't even need the Graveyard Hate, and our decks are packing, almost double-digit counts of Graveyard Hate these days, right? So you can see how even the discard plus creature progressions can really overwhelmingly win. If you factor Grave Hate into the mix, obviously we have the tools to beat this deck. I don't know how the matchup is. I don't know whether we're favored or unfavored or whether it's roughly even. It is way too early to tell, but I do know that this deck is beatable, and we just did it here, so another really nice, really clean 2-0 here in round 4. Let's move on to the 5th and final round of this modern league. Alright, my friends, once again, in a game 1 on the draw, we have to take a mulligan. We've been seeing a lot of one-landers, so hey, worth noting that maybe we're seeing more one-landers than we would with a 24-land deck. That's very possible, so file that away in terms of the data that we're gleaning from this league, but we have taken a lot of mulligans this league, but so have our opponents, and that's pretty fine with me overall, but we're priced into keeping a very action-light 6, but I'm hoping that this is a matchup where Bob can unmulligan us and indeed take over the game. So, shout out here to our opponent. I don't know how you say that. Sinji? In any case, very, very friendly opponent. We had a good chat running throughout the game. And unfortunately, we see Mishra's Baubles and Street Raves and Bloodstained Mires into Watery Graves. So we're probably against an interactive deck, of course, looking like Grixis Shadow, which is kind of the nightmare to face another Thoughtseize deck when we mulligan to a 5-land 6, but at least they didn't actually have the Thoughtseize on turn 1, right? So pretty good for us in that respect, but definitely among the last matchups we wanted to see, having mulligan to Bob plus 5 lands, right? And look at the opponent's start. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards in the graveyard by the time they move to their main phase here on turn 2. We're lagging. Let's let it catch up. But yeah, the opponent cycled a couple Baubles, cycled 3 Street Raves, and now they get the 10th card in their graveyard with a Polluted Delta. just going off and all the way down to 8. They know they're free to do it because they see turn 1 Overgrown Tomb, right? And they go a 5/5 Shadow on turn 2 with what clearly seems to be Stubborn Denial backup. So we draw another Bob, which is very, very poor in this situation. Good card in the matchup generally a lot of the time, but pretty poor. So Collective Brutality is the play here. We don't mind this trading with a Stubborn Denial. We've just gotta try to get the Stubborn Denials out of their hand and then top deck removal, and then try to take it from there. But the opponent does indeed. We do manage to trade with a Stubborn Denial, but we don't know their hand. Then they've got Inquisition to take away a Bob. They know our hand is just about empty. They shock in a Blood Crypt and hit us with a 7/7, then play another Shadow. So now we're really hoping to rip our 1-of Pulse, and we hope they don't have Stubborn Denial. Neither of those things happen, and it's just Bob going into chump block mode, and maybe getting one more draw step to try to turn the tide here. So, hey, no removal, so we're not dead on board. So we'll go ahead and block. We go down to 6. Opponent makes a land drop and passes, so they could be flooded, and we draw a trophy. Great card in the matchup, but not going to let us survive here. So we just force the opponent to click the attack with all button, and then we'll scoop. So absolutely brutalized. I mean, what are you going to do? Like I said, we had an unplayable 7. We mulled to a very poor 6, but I don't mulligan very poor 6s in Game 1s. I only mulligan unplayable 6s because, especially in Game 1, we're the proverbial 45-55 deck where we probably have some dead cards in any given matchup, or at least some very suboptimal cards, and that is just something that we should assume. So in Game 1s specifically, I'm looking for lands and spells. Obviously, I'm looking for my ideal curve out, and generally discard is the best form of interaction to see in a Game 1, but especially when we mulligan, I'm just looking for a hand that functions. And technically, Bob plus 5 lands is a functional hand. We're making our land drops. We've got a proactive thing to do on turn 2. We can, in theory, really snowball with a Bob. Sadly, like I said, we were against one of the decks best equipped to prey upon a mulligan like that, and they sure did. What a curve out. Absolutely insane, and the opponent acknowledged it themselves. So definitely got wrecked Game 1, but you guys know, if you've been with me for a while, I think the Grixis Shadow matchup is very, very good for us. So let's take a look with our new list how to sideboard against this deck, and then we'll see how we do. Alright, my friends, so against Grixis Shadow, we have actually a lot of really good cards to bring in. I think the best cards are in this category. These are the X-for-1 potential cards: Kalitas, Damnation, Liliana the Last Hope. All 3 of these cards are wonderful in the matchup. Those all come in, and especially if we have a lot to do, I'm a fan of cutting all forms of discard, including Collective Brutality. In the past, I've left 1 Thoughtseizes in. I think that's fine if you don't have enough to bring in. I think that's more than fine. But with this setup, it looks like we've got more slots available than we actually can perhaps suit. So I also am considering these 6 cards. Attacking their mana base with Choke is definitely real. Their mana base is very greedy, and we can really hit it with Fulminator and with Choke. They're both viable. I think I rate Fulminator a little bit more highly, but definitely all viable. Plague Engineer is interesting. I think this is also kind of a somewhat borderline card in the matchup. It's better, like it's basically there because it's a 2/2 Death Touch more than the debuff, but the debuff is relevant. It can kill Snapcaster Mages. It can kill Grim Lavamancer if they play that, naming human, or it can just shrink your anglers until they're smaller than the Tarmogoyf. If you got 4 or 5 Goyfs, Engineer flips the board in our favor. And then EE is, in the past I've rated it a little like as well as Fatal Push, if not slightly better, but you know, lately with Jace Vryn's Prodigy becoming more in vogue, and just with mana efficiency being the name of the game, I've lately said Fatal Push is a little better than EE, but EE is still very playable. So these 6 cards we're considering as well. If we were to play all 6 of those, which I think is viable, then it's a big question as to what to cut. Part of me wants to say on the draw we can maybe move away from a Bob or a Lily, but number one, that might not be correct. Number two, they might give us the play, right? Grixis Shadow players tend to do that against us, so maybe that's just loose, and maybe we just keep all of our very good cards. I actually think Grimflayer is a reasonable cut here, because even when Delirious, it's likely to be outsized by Anglers and Shadows. Now, that said, just flooding the board with threats is often enough to win against Shadow. Just threat density is king in this game, and we have a higher threat density than they do, which is one of the reasons I think the matchup is good. So even that feels a little bit loose. So ultimately, it's a really tough call. Finally, we can consider cutting a forest, which normally I would just do that for sure. That would be definitely one of my two potential cuts, but remember, we're already on a 23 land deck, so do we really want to go down to 22? Well, maybe that's still fine, because we just have a low curve, an extreme density of action, and remember, we do have the cantrips as well, plus 4 bobs to make us hit our land drops. So in this particular matchup, I believe what I did is cut away a forest, and also I think Fulminator Mage is probably the best of these. So you would be playing basically without one of these 3 cards, and I decided that I think the opponent is likeliest to give me the play. And also, now that we have 2 Abrupt Decays, among other things, I'm just going to play without the EE, which is mostly just a clunky 1-for-1 in this matchup anyway, and just go all in on the proactive plays. So this does clunk up our 3-drop slot a little bit. When I get more reps with this build, maybe I'll change my mind a little bit, but in any case, the power of our deck post-side against Shadow especially is nothing to sneeze at, and it would look at least something like this. But as always, my friends, let me know what you would do. In any case, we looked a lot like this. We'll go on to game 2. Alright, and here in game 2, the opponent has indeed given us the play. Definitely more common than not among experienced Shadow players, and I understand why they do it, but I think I prefer to have the play, even though they prefer to give me the play, you know? Resolving a Liliana on curve is so much easier when you're on the play. Both in terms of sequencing around their counter magic and just, the power of leveraging these planeswalkers on curve. Now that we have both in hand, very, very nice. So we go ahead and run out the Tarmogoyf. Obviously, there's every chance it could just die here, but we gotta use our mana efficiently, and then I think that's also another reason I like being on the play is because they play copies of both Lilianas sometimes post-side, and it feels a lot worse to run a Tarmogoyf out on turn 2 if they've got the potential turn 3 Liliana. So, end step, there's no kill spell, there's a cycle into a Thought Scour. And now it's an Inquisition, so our hand is so powerful that Inquisition is the last thing we wanted to see, but they take away a Tireless Tracker. So that makes me suspicious for a Stubborn Denial, and otherwise I think they might have been priced into taking a Liliana and hoping we didn't hit a 4th land, but maybe Tracker is just that good. Either way, we'll go ahead and get in with the Goyf. And I could have grown the Goyf. Let's say they do have Stubborn Denial. What am I going to do? I don't think I'm supposed to pass here. I think I'm supposed to be proactive since I have the proactive clock on the board. So I think I'm supposed to be proactive. I don't think passing is correct. Therefore, I'm going to jam a Liliana of one kind or the other into a potential Stubborn Denial. So why didn't I do that main phase to grow the Goyf? Well, even without doing so, it's still a 2-turn clock, because if they have it here, the Goyf's a 5/6 for the next 2 hits. So I don't think it matters, and I rather would give them the opportunity to decide, well, maybe I just have to push the Goyf this turn. But they didn't, and they did have the Stubborn Denial, so our Liliana of the Veil gets countered. I chose to run her out because even though she's one of the very best cards in the matchup, in this particular window, I rate Last Hope more highly because, number 1, she can buy back a tracker. Number 2, we have 2 catch-all removal spells in hand. So the Liliana the Last of the Veil Edict is not that necessary anymore, relative to the very high ceiling of recursive value from Last Hope. Opponents got Snapcaster Mage into Inquisition, which is definitely one of the better plays they could have, and there goes Last Hope, so very annoying to have lost all of our very valuable 3-drops, but we still have the big problem, the opponent rather, still has the big problem of Tarmogoyf. And Fulminator Mage is admittedly a very good draw, and we're going to play it, and tempting though it is to take them off of red and potentially take them off of a third land if they don't have a fourth one in hand, the opponent's life total is so low that we are supposed to just use this as a gray ogre that has upside. And, I mean, the more you play with a deck like this, the more you'll realize that is why Fulminator Mage is good. It really is. It's so much better than it sounds on paper, I promise. So the opponent has Jace Vryn's Prodigy. As I mentioned in the sideboarding tech, it is a lot more common these days. And that's all well and good, but the opponent has no Stubborn Denial represented. And we draw Liliana the Veil, so I was going to be pretty happy to pulse something, and it would have been the Vryn's Prodigy, but I'd rather just get the Liliana down. So now, even though they're not technically dead on board, they, sack one, they chump with the other. They're going to go to 2. There's just no way they recover from this. So that was... And this is what I mean. Like, yes, my deck got clunky post-side. Like, it's heavy on the 3-drops, even cut a land, blah, blah, blah. But the sheer value and efficiency, or both, of every single card that we saw. Literally every single card is, from their perspective, is like, wow, that's a tough one to deal with. Like, all of them. And I do mean all of them. So that's just, I think this matchup is just so favorable, and that's why. It's not a free win or anything. We don't really get free wins, but it's definitely one of the most favorable Tier 1 decks, or Tier 2 decks, if you ask me. And here's an example as to why. There's just not much the opponent could do against this flood of value, plus a quick clock, with them already doing so much damage to themselves, as a matter of course. So we come back strong with a win in Game 2, and we are playing for the 4-1, so let's go on to the final game of this league and see if we can get there. Alright, my friends, once more we are granted the play, and once more I'm not mad about it, and our hand is sweet. This is like night and day from our hand Game 2, but they're both sweet. This hand is lower curve, it's leaner, it's meaner, it's got different forms of interaction. It's got a lot of interaction, and whereas we just had the flood of like value permanence, can you answer all of these? Was the question we asked in Game 1. Now here in Game 2, we're saying, can we answer your things? And so we're gonna run out the Nile Spellbomb there. They're not very likely to be on anything like a Braid, and even so, that's another reason it's nice to be on the play, is because they are a little ways away from trying to answer the Spellbomb when it's convenient for them. So we're going to go ahead and run out Scavenging Ooze there. I would rather, because I have Spellbomb, I think I'd rather trade the Scooze with a Fatal Push than the Goyf. But obviously an interesting call, and it's even an interesting call to play a creature there, right? We are going shields down on the Spellbomb, and that could be bad against a potential Angler, but yep, sure enough, they have Thought Scour, so them having Thought Scour is kind of max punishing us, because now it puts us in a really interesting conundrum where they could, if they have a Gurmag Angler, they could very easily play it, and that is the one card we cannot cleanly answer with our current hand. So, but that's the risk you take to be proactive, and I think it's correct to be proactive there. Again, on the play, we want to get our creatures down as soon as possible, start getting value out of them. And the opponent is priced into using a full turn and spending a little life to dismember the ooze. That's totally fine with me. No Angler. And we draw Liliana of the Veil, so another really interesting spot. Liliana is almost our very best card in the matchup, especially in a situation like this. And it might be tempting to just straight up slam the Lily, make it happen, but it is also very tempting to have a very mana-efficient turn of cleaning out their graveyard with Nile Spellbomb, getting a redraw, and trying to take it from there. Tireless Tracker is a very fine card. We still need a 4th land, but I'm so happy with this sequencing. So the only way we're totally blown out here, like the opponent can no longer snap Dismember. They don't have that in the yard. They don't have, they don't have Fatal Push, anything like that. So if our Goyf trades 1-for-1, I'm totally fine. And even if they like have a Planeswalker to edict away the Goyf, if they had Lily the Veil, then we can play a Lily of the Veil of our own. And then it's a Liliana game and we're ahead, and we're more likely to draw a kill spell for their Planeswalker. So even though I think it was totally viable to play the Lily last turn, I kind of like our line here better, namely because I didn't really have anything I wanted to pitch to my own Lily +1. But either one is probably viable, and they have a Lily the Last Hope, which is a strong card, but definitely one that we can manage, especially having drawn a fetch land, and we're just living the dream. Tracker into Swamp, into Unearth for the Skoos. You could not ask for better than that. That was a heck of a turn, and our sequencing was extremely rewarded. Our sequencing last turn made this turn possible, and now the opponent just is so far on the back foot, it's unbelievable. They've got another kill spell, so there goes Tracker. That's step 1 for them getting back into the game. And then they've got a Shadow. They shrink our Goyf, so it's a lot of good things going on. Interestingly, they don't shock in the Watery Grave, so the Shadow is still only a 4/4, but we still have to kind of assume it can grow. But it doesn't really matter what its power level is, because we still have such a stacked hand. We get to push it, we get to throw out our lands, we get to take the Liliana up, and the opponent is just, again, so far on the back foot, it's unbelievable. Now our life total is high enough that I think it's definitely correct to just shock in the Tomb there so we can hold up a Skoos activation. We won't fire it off unless we have to, because we're playing around Snapcaster Mage Dismember, I guess, but definitely nice to have that up. And we draw Abrupt Decay, which is a good card but awkward with our Liliana, so I chose to crack a clue first to see if I can find something I would rather pitch. Now this is another really interesting decision point. What do we pitch here? Decay's a little bit better overall because it can't be countered, but look at our exact situation, think about exactly what we could need, and look at also the power on the board. We've got a 6/7 and a 2/2, so all of those things considered, I actually chose... thought about pitching the push, as you saw there, but I actually chose to pitch the Decay and keep the more mana-efficient spell in hand in case we really need it to force damage through this turn and just have lethal. Or just to most efficiently, have the most mana-efficient turns going forward. Client's lagging here right at the climax of the match. Here we go. So we move to attacks, send them both in, and the opponent will indeed flash in Snapcaster Mage, and now we get to do it all. We get to eat the target, and we get to push Snapcaster before damage. And because we still have a mana open, we're still playing around Stubborn Denial. And on top of all of that, we actually just have lethal on field, because killing the Snap puts a second creature into the yard. Well, a third one, I guess, because we have one too. But either way, it puts another creature into the yard, which we can eat with Skoos, get exactly 9, not shrinking the Tarmogoyf. So I have to say I'm pretty happy with the sequencing there. I think it was viable to play the Liliana out on turn 3, but thanks to the power of our new technology, the tempo positive, for once, a presence of a card like Unearth, we were able to just go insane with value on turn 4, and start having asymmetrical Liliana activations way sooner than if we had just jammed her on curve. So, again, that would have been viable, but our sequencing here, I think, was pretty tight, and also definitely got rewarded with how the game played out. So, absolutely dominant display in these both post-side games against Grixis Shadow, against, again, a very, very good and very amiable opponent. So, good games well played to Sinji. And, after that rough, free win we gave them here in Game 1, we come back strong, and we finish on a really high note, going 4-1 in the Wild West of post-Horizons Modern. All right, my friends. So there you have it. That was our 4-1. That was our league. 2 leagues under the belt. Post Horizons, 2 positive results. We will take it, and the new tech is looking awesome. Admittedly, in this league, it was not as prevalent as it was in our first league. In our first league, we saw the new tech everywhere. It was showing up left, right, and center. Here, it was mostly Unearth that was a major player. We had a nice moment to crack a Peatland when we were otherwise flooded, and we found action off of it. Plague Engineer showed up. We didn't even side in the oof, but still, what really shone here, I think, was the switch to a main deck double Nile Spellbomb setup. Obviously, that was really nice against Living End. It would have been really nice against the Bridgevine deck, but we didn't even need it. And obviously, a good way to be pre-boarded against Shadow as well. So, despite it being sided out totally dead our first couple matchups, it's still never totally dead, just like Unearth. You cycle it. These cards are giving our archetype the ability to have extremely tempo-positive card selection or main deckable hard graveyard hate, all that can also grow the Tarmogoyf potentially while we're at it. All in the main deck, all with the high floor of cycling it away for 2 total mana invested. So, I think this is very promising. I think this is a very promising shell for our archetype. I don't know if 23 lands is correct, especially with Peatland in the mix. It might be correct to just keep playing 24. We did have some 1-landers we had to mulligan here. We have more in flood insurance than we've ever had before now that we have Peatland, so maybe we just play 24. But then again, we have way more 1-drops than we used to. We have fewer of the top-end cards than we used to. And we've got to cut some stuff to make way for all of these new 1-mana spells in the main deck, right? So, let me know what you think. Is 23 too greedy, or is 23 the sweet spot? In any case, my friends, this was the league. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember, if you are enjoying this content in general, the frequency of it, the quality of it, the amount that I interact with you, the viewer, please consider joining us on Patreon. There are rewards for doing so, and I would love to have your support. It would mean a lot to me, and as always, thank you to all Patreons currently supporting the Grimflayer. It is awesome. I could not even believe it when I started out that I would end up with this much support and this many followers, and it means the world to me. So thanks again, everybody. And remember, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel to help it grow. You can like, you can share, you can comment. And I look forward to hearing your comments. I look forward to hearing your takes on some of the sideboarding, some of the lines. We're still in uncharted territory here. There's still a lot to figure out about this meta, but I am very optimistic that our archetype has what it takes. This just looks so powerful to me. I think people still underestimate BG the Rock. I think people still sleep on the potential power of it. Admittedly, it does take the reps, it does take tight play, but I think we can tangle with the format just as well, if not better, than we were before Horizons. So, good times, my friends. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Stay tuned to the channel. As always, more gameplay to come, and I will see you for that. Hope you have a great day.